looking forward to the committee.
The special meeting of the Board of Education for February 8th, 2018 is called to order. Welcome to everyone present and to our TV viewers. This meeting is being televised live and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the board website for replay times. This meeting is also being streamed live on our PPS TV services website. This evening, the board will be voting on the ratification of the 2016-2019 Portland Association of Teachers PPS contract. When the new school board was installed last summer, one of our priorities was to reach an agreement with our teachers. We knew this was important if we wanted to unlock a new relationship with teachers in our district. And this was going to be essential if we were going to work together to better support and prepare our students for college, career, and life. As was noted earlier this week, the Portland Association of Teachers ratified this contract on Monday, and tonight the Board of Education will consider and vote on ratification. The resolution we are considering has been posted publicly. In addition, the contract has also been posted publicly for the last 3 days. In my engagement with the district over the last 2 decades, final contract language is usually available weeks after the ratification vote. Both the PAT and PPS leads spent many hours drafting language throughout the process, and I applaud both Laird and Marty for that work to have it ready for us for the ratification by PAT, and then for us to be able to share the language with the broader community. So it's been available and posted so the community and media can review since Monday. As I said, that hasn't normally been the past practice. So community members and media have an opportunity to review the contract and ask questions about the impacts. There have been those that have requested for us to delay today's vote. But we've been at the table for more than 20 months, and the strong sentiment from this school community was that PPS should not move to unilaterally implement its contract terms, and there was not a desire for a strike either. A clear message that we received, I think not just me, but other board members and staff, was that from parents and teachers, which was work it out, find common ground, and I think we've done that. And from my perspective, we've reached a point in the mediation with PAT that this was the agreement that would lead to a settlement, and that both sides made compromises to get here. I say that as someone who only joined the discussions recently since being elected to the board, but the last 4 months have included comprehensive and deep discussions on issues of importance to both teachers and the school district. So delay is not going to change the agreement, but tonight we will have a full discussion, surface questions about the agreement, and then have a vote. As I said earlier, this bargaining began about 20 months ago, before Directors Moore and Bailey and I were on the board, and before Superintendent Guerrero was hired as superintendent. The PPS bargaining team that started almost completely switched out from the start to the end. It started with interest-based bargaining, shifted to mediation, and ended with a collaborative and professional process to get to an agreement where both sides gave something to reach an agreement, because reaching an agreement this time was the right thing to do for our students and our teachers and our school community. On behalf of the board, I would like to recognize and thank the members of the district bargaining team, our lead negotiator, Laird Cusack, and team members Kylie Rogers, Jen Thomas, principals Curtis Wilson, and Kathleen Elwood, and a special thank you to senior leader Antonio Lopez and to Director Constam, who were there from the very beginning to the end at 3:30 in the morning. Also want to thank Director Moore and Superintendent Guerrero, who joined the bargaining teams and spent many nights discussing issues, again, both that were important to both the school district, but also to our teachers. I also want to recognize PAT President Suzanne Cohen and the PAT bargaining team for the spirit in which the agreement was reached. Both sides were fierce advocates for their positions, ideas, and perspectives, but we were able to find common ground on some important issues that will be positive for our students and our teachers. Other issues we're going to have to save for another day. So at this time, I'd like to ask Superintendent Guerrero, who was he was a late arrival, but he was a catalyst to get us over the finish line. I'd like to ask you to provide an overview of the contract, maybe your perspective on what it means for students and our teachers and our school community, and other perspectives on the outcome of our bargaining.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for those of you who are here physically present, and to our listening audience. This is on a very special episode for those of you who remember TV in the 70s. Tonight's special session, I think, is momentous. I want to extend my gratitude for their persistence to the same collection of people for whom this has been a journey, particularly for some members of the teams. But what I wanted to be able to start off with tonight, since Chair Brim Edwards has really laid out the context nicely, is a high-level overview, what highlights of our tentative agreement looks like, which we're really happy to hear that Portland Association of Teachers has ratified this positively. So I'm going to jump right into a presentation that talks about some themes that are in this agreement. So I'm going to move to some of the key features, new and improved, more. You'll notice in the document it's 150 pages long, so I'm going to do my best to summarize it in 8 to 10 slides here at a high level. But one thing that's really important, aside from the quality, just having more time for instruction, for teaching and learning to take place. So there's some features of that in the bargaining agreement. And then there's some aspects of increasing instructional time that aren't necessarily things that as a district, are bargaining items. And so it's important as an educator to really promote making sure we have high quality teaching and learning time for our students. And so one thing I want to make sure that the broader community understands is we also have an opportunity through our school calendar and our daily schedules to increase that time. So while it won't be found in our contract, features that create a more family-friendly schedule, like elimination of late starts or early releases, are going to substantially increase the kind of time that our teachers have to have uninterrupted instructional days is going to be a feature moving forward for school year 18-19. But in the contract, we did find opportunities to increase on that time as well. And it's time for student learning, but also time for teacher learning. So time that's dedicated for professional learning, particularly in themes or areas that are important to both of us, where we know as a school system we need to place some emphasis in areas around how to better understand and serve our diverse learners, for instance, or our students with special needs. And we know for our educators, for our professionals to do their best work, they need time together. They need time to do some planning, to be prepared in their lessons, and so this agreement affords them a little bit more time each day to be able to do that. I would say one thing that people probably is getting a lot of attention here is that class size matters. We want to make sure that the ratio of adults to students allows for differentiation to occur, that as teachers aim to be thoughtful about how to serve the diverse learners, whether they have disabilities or English learners, or from subgroups that maybe aren't finding themselves at grade level, that there's an opportunity to do that. And so as we think about class size, while we haven't identified a maximum capacity, we have said there's a certain point where we should acknowledge that it has a workload bearing. And so we've called that a threshold. And what we've proposed to do is to acknowledge any time there's additional students beyond that threshold and recognize that in a differential for our classroom teachers. For our specialists, they also see a lot of students, and that also matters. And so caseload for many of our special ed also makes a difference, and we've set out some goals for that too. So this agreement lays out a table K to 12, and for many of our specialist roles, what we believe those more doable caseloads might look like. We spent a lot of time at the table talking about a particular area where we know as a school system we need to lend a lot of attention in evolving our service delivery model for special education students. And so we've outlined some ways that we want to make sure and put an emphasis on that. That includes making sure that as students' disabilities get identified, that we offer the right level of program seats to meet their needs. And if you're going to offer a full continuum, sometimes that support happens in a more inclusive fashion, and sometimes we need to make sure and offer those programs throughout our school portfolio. And then last but not least, we know our educators didn't go into this business because of it. It matters to show respect and acknowledgement in the way of compensation increases. And so a feature of this contract does include those compensation increases, a total of 8% going back to 2016-17, which will be retroactive, including for this year. So that is a feature in here. The school calendar. This is obviously an area where a lot of families would have interest. We have added an additional day for school year 18-19. Prior to this contract, we were operating at 176 days. 177 now puts us a little bit more at the median with surrounding school districts, but that additional day allows us to incorporate that much more learning time for our students. If you think about the additional day and you think about the recaptured instructional time by making sure that each and every school day starts at the same time, that accumulation results in a lot of additional hours for uninterrupted core instruction to take place. So we're looking forward to being able to plan accordingly. The work calendar would also be a day longer for our educators because of all the themes and the priority areas that we agreed that we needed to work on. We need time to do that professional learning. So there'll be an additional day for our educators to come together and receive that kind of training and learning, and hopefully we can collaborate on sharing those promising practices. We anticipate that this is an additional day that would happen at the front of the school year, so we can front load some of that time before the start of the school year. The additional time for teachers to plan, there's an extension of 15 minutes in this contract for 4 days of the week. That's 7 3/4 hour workday. Also more in line with some of our surrounding districts, but this does result in a gain of 60 paid planning time minutes per week for our educators to actually be prepared with their lessons for the students that they serve. Speaking a little bit more on the student and caseload goals, what it does here is it does set about a clear set of thresholds for our students and class size K through 12, and also acknowledges that we have a lot of specialists that obviously see a lot of students throughout the course of their work week. And while those are goals, we also wanted to make sure that there were some remedies whenever we go over that desired goal. And so one is obviously to balance the class sizes across multiple teachers where that's possible. A second option is to assign additional personnel who can support classroom learning and teachers. Or as a third option, that we recognize that threshold going over by affording a stipend to the teacher of that classroom or the specialist who goes beyond their caseload. I spoke about the special education support briefly and the commitment we want to make to continuing to work on our service delivery model and really making sure that we offer a high quality full continuum of options for our students with disabilities. We also know it makes a difference, particularly some folks might think that in a substantially separate classroom where you have fewer students that adding one more, you know, what's one more? Well, when you have 10 students who experience a more intense level of need in specialized instruction, that additional student really makes a difference. And so we want to recognize and do our best to maintain a manageable caseload there. We also recognize that a lot of our students are showing up at school with readiness to learn challenges. We have a lot of students who are experiencing trauma. They're arriving at our front door, and clearly there's a need for some social emotional support and some immediate case management. Just in taking a look at a quick analysis of where we're seeing many of these instances, many of them are happening with kindergartners, surprisingly. What we do know is that we need an ability and a capacity to respond in those situations so that our teachers are not left alone to figure out how to support students who are demonstrating some of these more intensive needs. So this is an area where there was a lot of agreement around how do we do that in a thoughtful way. And if we're going to have a team that's able to respond in a rapid fashion, what kind of versatility and personnel do you need on a team like that to better meet the needs of students who get identified? This is a feature that was identified previously in an agreement, and it hasn't come to full fruition, but it's one that we're committed to making sure is available there to our teachers. It's also important to recognize that the response isn't just there for our students. It's also there to act in consultation with our educators. Teacher compensation. Pay increases. 3% retroactive for the 2016-17 school year. and 2.75 since July 1st for this school year. That's hopefully our teachers very quickly, pending tonight's decision, we can get to work on processing some retroactive checks for our teachers. And I know you can't see it there for 18-19. We're not hiding a big number all of a sudden, but that represents a 2.25% COLA for the coming school year. The total of those 3 years comes to 8% in this 3-year agreement. What's all that going to cost, you ask? Well, we have our best estimates here. Recalling that for the last 2 years, this have kind of been integrated into our ongoing budgets. The 7.3 for 16-17, 14.2 for this year. And if you take into account the compounding costs of the contract agreement, that would come to about $27 million for the coming school year. Obviously, that's something we're going to have to prioritize right off the top as we go about our budget development season that is commencing now. Most important, I want to highlight and end here with this slide is I think there's a lot of features in there that we came to compromise around, but more important to anything you'll find in this document that I think many of us appreciate, especially for those folks who have been part of the history in this district and for those of us that are educators, I think, and I think I can say authentically, is a renewed opportunity to engage in a collaborative relationship between school district administration with our rank and file educators who are the ones who are in front of our students each and every day. Without supporting them and allowing them to do their best work, we just won't get to take it to the next level. I am looking forward to this refreshed relationship. Relationships take work and commitment. That's what we're committing to here, but I'm very excited and optimistic about the remaining challenges that we agree we need to take on, and I'm looking forward to taking those on together. Thank you. Board, that summarizes my highlights and features for the contract. We have staff here on deck. We anticipate you're going to have much more detailed questions, so we're ready to take those.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I was just sort of ticking through my list of questions, and you've knocked some of them out, so appreciate that, and I think it's a great summary of 20-plus months of work. I think instead of going to questions, let's get the motion on the table first, and then we can have questions and discussion. So the board will now consider resolution number 5569, the 2016-2019 agreement between the Portland Association of Teachers and School District number 1J, Multnomah County, Oregon. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Director Constam moves and Director Rosen seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 5569. We need to do one more thing with the resolution. We need to make a slight amendment to it that you should have in front of you a red-lined version of the resolution, and we're striking a couple lines. We're striking the words "superintendent is authorized and directed to execute" and the words "on the terms presented to the board and filed in the record of the meeting." And what we're going to do is we're just adding some language to allow for, although Laird and Marty were diligent scribes and got it all ready. It's 156 pages, and we recognize there's some formatting and other issues, some things that need to move around. So we're going to add some language that will allow them to make sort of non-substantive changes in the formatting and moving things around. So I'm going to just read the resolution as that we're going to consider here tonight. I know you have it all in front of you, but I want to just read it for the record. The 2016-19 agreement between the Portland Association of Teachers representing licensed personnel and School District number 1J, Multnomah County, Oregon, as provided to the Board of Education is adopted and approved, and payments on the agreement is also thereby authorized subject to any required future board action. The superintendent designee is authorized to make technical corrections to the agreement in order to correct typographical and spelling errors, make formatting changes, or renumber provisions so long as the intended meaning of the agreement is not thereby altered. Such technical corrections shall be reported to the board at the next available opportunity. So I'd like a motion to move the amended language.
Second.
So Director Rosen moves and Director Moore seconds the amended version of resolution number 5569. Oh, Karen, we should have voted on the underlying resolution first, or do we? The amendment first. Okay, so now we're going to vote on the amended language, and then we go vote on the underlying language. Okay, so I'm going to ask for a board vote. This is to just get the resolution on the table, the amended resolution. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Representative Tran?
Aye.
The motion passes by 7-0 vote with Student Rep Tran voting aye. Sorry, 6-0. So now we're going to put the motion on the. So. We're not voting on the. Excuse us. We're Representative Esparza or Director Esparza Brown is out of town this evening and wants to participate in the vote. But I think we're just putting the motion on the table. Sorry. Because maybe when we get to close to wrapping up. So now we're going to vote on the putting the motion on the table. All those in favor say aye. 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 Those opposed?
We already voted.
We have to vote.
That was the amendment. This is the regular.
This is the regular.
We're not going to have discussion.
No.
If you want the discussion and questions.
Yeah,
Yes. So thank you for not voting. Okay. You were right, Roseanne. Okay, sorry. The amendment threw me for a loop. So we have the amended resolution before us. Okay. So at this point, I would like to ask board members if you let's start with questions, and then from there we can people want to make some remarks or observations or statements about their vote. We can have time for that. So with that, any questions for the superintendent or the district bargaining team?
I have a comment. I'll wait.
Dr. Whaley?
I need to make a statement first that because my wife is a proud member of the Portland Association of Teachers, I have a conflict of interest. I spoke with the Oregon School Board Association about this. This is apparently fairly common throughout the state. And the practice is everywhere else is to declare the conflict and then to go ahead and vote anyway.
Thanks.
Did you have any questions?
I would like some clarification. I wasn't on the bargaining team, so I didn't hear the conversation around the files, personnel files. So what's in and what's out, and why some of the language was added to the contract, and also what it doesn't. I mean, there's some people can't talk about some things, but others can. So just some clarification on around
I
that.
can understand, Director Bailey, why you want to be clear on that. This is an area that's garnered quite a bit of attention. So, well, we have our Chief Negotiator and Chief of Talent and Culture here this evening. Hopefully they can illuminate this.
So in regards to the, there's language in the contract about investigation files and personnel files. Personnel files contain the personnel actions that relate to the particular employee. The investigation files are files that we keep and have all the evidence and documents and information that is gathered during an investigation. That includes if the person is put on paid administrative leave, and those files do not become part of the personnel file. And there is specific language in the contract regarding the personnel files. The investigation files we actually hold separately and have, in fact, every place I've worked, we always held those files separately. On your second question regarding who can speak or not, have I answered the first question?
So has this been past practice in Portland Public Schools, or how has it worked, and what's the change in practice?
To my knowledge, there's not a change in practice. The documents that we certainly didn't bargain a different practice with the union. The personnel files that we are being kept the same way they were prior to this bargain.
Okay, thanks.
Now, the second question you had about who can speak and not?
Correct.
Okay. The union had raised that a concern that sometimes when their members were placed on paid administrative leave, that the information coming from the local administrator was inconsistent and sometimes problematic. What we did is we addressed that concern by allowing the administrator to be able to tell those who may need to know in the cases of criminal conduct or child endangerment or violence, be able to tell those people that the employee was not at the building, and to respond that the employee was not at the building if asked. The agreement only deals with administrators. It does not in any way limit the district's ability to make statements or provide information that it chooses to do so from senior management and the board or the superintendent.
And if I could just add, I think that this language for both the district and the Portland Association of Teachers is important as we think about the district balancing its obligations to ensure due process with its obligations on public interest. And student safety is always the first consideration.
Go ahead.
If I could ask a follow-up question, Ms. Large, how does that treatment of the personnel files square with public records law?
Director Anthony, I think it is consistent with how we have proceeded and understand where we are in somewhat of a state of flux. And as you know, the district is currently in litigation trying to get clarification on some issues of public records law. But I think that I think we struck that balance here as we're waiting for some definitive court ruling as well.
Since you bring up litigation, what flexibility is there, what ability is there in the contract and with the relationship with the union to renegotiate this if it goes opposite the district's position?
I think that the union and the district both have a clear understanding of where that case is in its posture and have forged a path to work together. If there's a decision from the court that makes it impossible to comply simultaneously with the agreement and with public records law. That being said, I would ask Laird to comment further if there's any further color on the negotiations. It's a very delicate issue that we want to get right.
The contract itself does not deal with the public records law. The only agreement that we have as part of this bargain is that when the district has its next draft of the policy, that it will in fact send a copy to the union, and the union will have their rights under state law to demand a bargain. There is no, we didn't provide them any more rights than is allowed under the existing Collective Bargaining Act.
Okay, so then to summarize the newer language around this issue clarifies current practice.
Well,
in terms of what goes into an investigative file and what goes into a personnel file. Is that correct?
Well, there actually, to my recollection, isn't any language in here about differentiating those except for that the administrative leave letters will go into the investigation file, which I thought was our practice. And it would be appropriate because there are investigations which have no findings, and those would not end up in a personnel file. So we don't take any action because we find that there is nothing to act on. The actual personnel article, really the change in the article was to clarify educators' ability to get their file and to clear up a dispute that language had caused regarding the association's access to the personnel files. We didn't make other changes other than when we did the letters of expectation formatting, which are expectations that do not have any finding of wrongdoing. They are specifically an expectation that those will be rotated out of building files after 3 years.
And as somebody who is an employee and has had to deal with it from the employee side, I appreciate it goes both ways. I've been on that end of the stick, so to speak.
Can I,
Are you going to go on, excuse me, are you going to go on a different topic? Because I was
No.
going to, okay, then I'll let you go ahead.
Okay, so I was on the bargaining team, and so I had the privilege of sitting through very long discussions about these fairly technical issues, and where language is exquisitely nuanced in a contract. So I'm going to put it in plain language, because I think these are the questions that we're getting from parents and community members. In light of a number of unfortunate instances that have become known, where student safety was jeopardized, how can parents and students and teachers and community members feel reassured that similar situations are not going to occur? What actions can we take and have we taken, either within the contract or outside the contract, to ensure that student safety remains paramount?
Well, at the most basic level, the employee relations team is now actually fully staffed at 4 people. My understanding that has not been the case for longer than anybody can identify. And so we now have resources for administrators who run across these issues. We have made a very clear assignment of the staff to make sure that administrators have access and know who they need to contact. We're working our way forward now that we have this agreement to go and produce a investigations and discipline procedures manual, and go out and do training for our administrators and make sure that administrators have the tools they need, both to recognize the issues that they need to raise and to be able to conduct those investigations with our assistance. I think that having looked at some of the prior cases, in some cases our practice was not consistent and people slipped through the cracks. And the most important aspect of dealing with individuals who should not be in our school system or need corrective action is to have a consistent practice of investigation, correction, and discipline. There really were no, the district 20 months ago really had not made any proposed changes in the sections regarding building files. Those are issues we could raise in the next negotiations. And once the ground rules stated that once we had reached a certain point, no new issues could be raised. Violating ground rules is potentially unfair labor practice. So some of those issues could not be addressed at the time that I showed up 16 months ago. But I think the change in practice is the most important aspect, and to provide the training to administrators and build their confidence in dealing with these issues.
And I would just say, I am confident that with the consistent practices that we have employed and will continue to support administrators in the buildings in utilizing and the support of the employee and labor relations team, that there is no new or previous language in this contract that prevents us from upholding student safety as the center of what is important, and ensures that we can also hold accountable ourselves and all employees within the district.
I think it should be noted that these are practices that are going to apply across all employee groups, not just one particular group. So, you know, it's about having sort of a robust set of practices that are consistently applied, and the district does its job well.
And I'll take it back a step from the practices to the policies, and we are in the process of still revising some important policies that have bearing on this with our sexual harassment policies, which will come before board committee next week and hopefully before the board within about a month, which will clarify and make some revisions to current policies. But then, to echo what Kylie's saying, the important piece there is how to make sure that that gets out into all of our buildings, and that our administrators are really well supported in knowing exactly how to respond and what the policies are.
Director Anthony?
And if I could just build on what Mr. Cusack said and direct this specifically to the superintendent. 3 issues that I see around this. One is the change around tape recording meetings. Another is directing people with complaints to speak directly with the person with who they have an issue first. And the third is giving the name of a complainant to the person about whom they are complaining. I understand the circumstances that bring these issues up. I expect I know the intent of the district behind them, but on all 3 of these issues, to my certain knowledge, in the past, they have put children at risk. In the past, they have excluded families, particularly our most vulnerable families, from being able to participate in the process. I hope, I expect that district administration is going to be giving building administration instruction, direction, ongoing support on how to deal with those issues competently, thoroughly, and with good judgment.
There is a refresh in this contract on those particular issues.
So, Director Anthony, I would first say that to your last assumption, the answer is yes, we will absolutely be ensuring that we uphold a consistent practice and support administrators in doing that. In the complaint section of the contract, you referred to the language. The only change in that language is that it clarifies that the complainant does not need to be offered the opportunity to talk to the employee in question if the complaint involves allegations of sexual misconduct.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I was trying to be brief, but I recognize that the language there is may, not necessarily will or will not, but it leaves open judgment on the part of the building administrator.
But they're not required.
As Director Constam just said, they aren't necessarily required.
In the case of where the complaint involves allegations of sexual misconduct,
Is explicitly
forbidden.
Yes. The other areas not.
Correct.
May.
So I think, Director Anthony, whether it's this topic or any other changes in our agreement, for sure, we want to make sure that there's a uniform process by which our responses are applied, regardless of what school, regardless of what principal.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're going to need to do some refresh and some education on what are features in this contract so that the experience that any given teacher has in any building, and we spent a lot of time talking about this, we want to make sure that we minimize that variability, and we work with our principals, who I know also want to be dutiful and do things in a correct fashion, and that's on us to make sure we're offering clarity of guidance in this area or any other.
So I've got a few questions, although everybody's ticking them off. So I just want to go back to one issue that's been discussed earlier, and I just want a clear question with a maybe short answer. So will this contract allow PBS to release the names of staff on paid leave?
This contract does not address that issue.
And then currently, PBS has a legal case against the Citizen and Reporter about access to records on staff on leave. Does this contract impact that case?
No, it does not.
Thank you. And now I'm going to get back into something that I'm, as a parent, much more interested in, is instructional days. So if people don't mind if I change the topic. So I'm wondering if you could speak briefly to, there's been some confusion about this. The previous contract had like a 190 plus 2 days, and then we've changed that to be 192. And can you talk about the difference between the guaranteed and the conditional of why there's been sort of this change? So we could have had 178 days, but that was conditioned on some things happening. And so in this contract, we've moved away from putting conditions on it, and now there's a true base. You want to speak to that? And I'm
yes,
sorry, it's a
yeah.
complicated issue, but I think there's been a lot of back and forth about the topic, about whether
The prior contract allowed for the district to add 2 instructional days for a total of 178 in any year in which it did not cut the Teachers Association staff, and which led to a case of where this year, since we did in fact cut the amount of PAT staff, that the 2 days could not be added. The new contract removes the condition and simply increases the instructional days by 1 day. So that will be in the contract every year, regardless of what actions the board takes regarding budgeting. And as the superintendent said, we're quite clearly looking at the early releases and the late starts for additional instructional time. We've had 7 or 8 late starts and 4 early releases at the high school level. So that gets you back a day at the high school level and more than a day at the 2 days at the elementary and middle school level. So in total, if we take those actions, which are outside the contract, in terms of the changing the early and lates, we will in fact increase, get the instructional time back up to 178 or more, and that actually compares rather favorably with surrounding districts, many of who have a lot of early releases and fewer instructional days.
Yeah, I want to thank you all for putting together sort of a comparative of districts, the information provided by staff of Beaverton, Hillsborough, Portland, Tigard, and Gresham Barlow, and we are at the top with the exception of Beaverton, but they also have early release or late opening every week, which is quite substantial.
So if we think in terms of instructional minutes,
Or hours.
what's the impact?
Well, the instructional hour over the course of the year, again, Laird talked about it in the equivalent of instructional days, but we have, with no change to late start or early close, we've increased our permitted or guaranteed instructional hours by a full school day, so 6 to 6 and 3 to 7, and then we, in consideration of the late starts and early closures, that would add an additional 16 hours back of instructional time at the elementary and middle school level. school and between 8 and 10 hours back at the high school, for a net overall gain of, doing the math on 24 hours, so 24 hours on average between the elementary, middle, and high school. A little bit more.
And I also want to just close the loop on this issue that there is a connection to what the superintendent referred to in the professional development days that are added to this contract, because that's what those late starts and early releases were used for, that were valuable to our educators, particularly the equity work that took place then. So that also has found a home.
So just another question. You earlier stated that issues that weren't raised at the beginning, there was an agreement that they wouldn't be raised later, and there was ramifications if they were raised. There were also, it's my understanding, some articles and TAs agreed to and voted on by the board last summer, or I think it was last spring. And I'm wondering if you could just outline what those articles are, because I think, you know, in the community, when something stretches on so long, the sort of question of like what's changeable and, you know, what's not, or what had already been set in motion.
Part of the agreement and the ground rules at the beginning of bargaining was that some of the agreements would be voted on and would be ratified by the parties during the course of bargaining. And those, if anybody wants to look at the actual detail, you can go to the March 7, 2017 board materials, and it's all there. All the TAs are in there in their original form. The topics that were covered were some language about moves, which had become a real issue because we're moving people out of their high school, teachers out of their high schools, and redoing them and bringing them back in. So certain compensation for moving all their materials in and out. Issues like P cards, notice of policy changes, which frankly is appropriate under state law. Some changes in leaves, some of it to comply with changes in federal law. We moved up the evaluation schedule so that probationary teachers would be evaluated earlier and set dates for that, so that there would be a longer period of time for those particularly who were in jeopardy to understand that that was the case and get more assistance. Some change in sick leave bank, some changes in professional development. The letters of expectation was format was established. We renewed the Rosa Parks year-round school agreement because they have slightly different rules because of their school year, and so those sorts of things. We also had, before that, we had agreed to an MOA on the safety section that dealt with school climate, and some contract language changes in that. Those were all time limited. They basically set that they would be done by the time, I think by the end of last year. So we actually bargained some more on those topics, and that helped bargaining very much.
So earlier, and this is my question for the superintendent, and somewhat unrelated to the contract, but I think in just the context of the instructional days, the family-friendly schedules that we referenced, that this is, a lot of it will be when the calendar is presented to the board and the community for review. Those are, many of those will be baked into that, not necessarily into the contract agreement.
So that's true. Pending tonight's vote, of course, we have to produce a school calendar that incorporates all of those features. So the planning days will want to put clarity right up front around our intention not to have late starts, early dismissals. Obviously, our teachers have particular planning days for grading and other things. And of course, school vacations are important. We want to make sure there's clarity of understanding around when we may have a makeup for inclement weather, although we really haven't had any here this year, so I don't know what all the talk was about. So
we still got a little winter left.
Yeah, it's still February.
But I am holding a prototype of the school calendar, just, thinking ahead around how we do that. And so certainly there'll be a lot there to review and to understand, and how it all kind of comes together, I think, in a way that makes sense for our students and for our families. My interest, of course, as an educator is to have 5 full instructional days that are uninterrupted for core instruction to take place. And I know our families, probably don't want to be thinking about who's going to take my kid to school on Wednesday when it starts late. All of those questions, I think, are important to make sure we're doing what we can to not just promote learning, but also look out for our families. The other areas, and I've heard about these since I got here, is we have certain months of the school year that are pretty difficult and broken up with a lot of long weekends, which result in very short work weeks at the school level, and so we want to try to remedy that as much as possible. I think we have a prototype that does that. So I look forward to that discussion after tonight.
So another just follow-up question on related to dual language immersion programs, and the issue was raised about the need for translated materials in the classroom, and given the expansion of DLI in our schools, teachers and parents had said there need to be greater access. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what the contract provided for, because I know that was a topic of discussion.
So the addition in the contract specifically provides for professional educators who are teaching students in dual language immersion programs access to district adopted curriculum materials in the language of instruction, and provides the opportunity to agree with the Department of Dual Language, DLI, on a mechanism to translate those if they are not currently available.
Great. So just one last question, sorry. So in the complaint section of the contract, what avenues does PBS have to address issues of misconduct? And just is there specific language that was added, or because my understanding is that there very little language actually was changed to that.
That is correct. Again, the district hadn't raised changes in that area. The union did actually raise a number of amendments that they were seeking. In the end, through a lot of conversation, we didn't make any changes in complaint process other than for the change we wanted regarding the not having to offer the meeting in the cases of sexual misconduct. Additionally, through a lot of conversation with the UNISERVs, we're going to have an extended conversation about the difference between complaints and investigations, because there are often times in which there really isn't a complaint. There's just something we need to investigate. Someone didn't complain, they just gave us information. So we've agreed that we're going to have some additional conversations about dealing with those issues as part of contract administration, which I think will be very helpful.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have any other questions?
You asked about family-friendly scheduling, Chair Brim-Edwards. One not small thing that I think will matter to a significant number of our families, for students with disabilities, we want to make sure that as an IEP team we're making those meetings available in a way that works for our parents. And particularly when our educators are prepared and ready to meet in what might otherwise be their planning period, we want to recognize that. And so if they're giving up their prep period to be able to meet with families right after school, we want to make sure and compensate for that, because otherwise they're going to do that hour of planning after the meeting. So that's another feature. That'll allow more flexibility to work with parent schedules when they can come on campus for those important IEP meetings.
Great. Director Anthony?
I don't have any more questions, but I have a couple of comments. One is that I am very happy to see the class size goals going into the contract. That's enormously important to our parents, our students, our community, and certainly our teachers. The other thing that's new that I think is absolutely marvelous is the language on page 78 around letters of intent. For years, much longer than I have been on the board, I have been hearing about what a barrier the lack of those letters is in doing good recruiting. And I realize that to many people in the community, it seems like these incremental moves we are making, moving up the time when we do hiring, and now with letters of intent, it feels like very little progress, particularly around recruiting teachers of color. But we are chasing, our HR department, I know, is chasing after a very, very small pool of people, and we need to give them every edge that we can. And if we don't make these changes, we're just cutting ourselves off at the knees. So that's something I think we should certainly be celebrating.
Well, thank you for highlighting those two areas, Director Anthony. If you rewind the game tape, if you recall, a number of months ago upon my arrival, there was testimony here around Superintendent Guerrero. You've been in a couple of districts that really emphasized class size as an important factor, and I hope we've delivered on that here and recognizing that. And then secondly, to your point around having an ability to recruit the best and brightest talent to come to Portland Public Schools, I think this gives us yet another tool to be able to do that. Some of us were with some of our business leaders earlier today, and this was something that they expressed. We want the best people we can find in front of our children, and I think this is just one more means to be able to do that.
Great. I think, do you want to, are these questions, or we're getting close to moving to statements? Because I think we want to get what happened to Roseanne. She's been traumatized by me earlier. Let's get Julie on the phone maybe for this last portion. I also want to note for board members that we received, and you should have a copy in your inbox. If you, I know some of you already looked at it. The Society for Professional Journalists, do I have the correct, is that the right name? Has submitted some testimony for the board's consideration. We got it this afternoon. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Julie.
Julie, you're at the board meeting. All right.
Hello, everybody.
So Julie, our director, Esparza Brown, we just have spent some time, we had a presentation by Superintendent Guerrero. We had...
Oh, wow, it's hard to hear. Sorry.
Hang in there. We'll just do our best and proceed.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe should we put that more in the middle?
Is that possible to pass it down? Is it wireless or is it connected?
Can't go very far, actually.
So maybe, Amy, could you just tell her, Director Constam, can you just share
We've
quick recap what we've
gone
done?
through a lot of questions. We have the resolution on the floor. I think we're just going to solicit any comments that board members have and proceed to a vote.
Okay. I think my comments are around, I'm thrilled that we're here because, yes, our teachers do need a contract, and I'm so appreciative of the whole bargaining team for getting us where we're at and for Guadalupe's leadership. I'm particularly happy to see some of the provisions that are put in place for special education teachers. in terms of some added supports for them. So that I think that was really important as we continue to do this work at finding the ways to best educate all of our students. I'm going to continue to track. I think there were some provisions, some discussion also about for bilingual teachers in terms of giving them support for translating materials. I think we need to continue to have a laser focus on our dual language programs and making sure that we provide the adequate curriculum for teachers as well. But again, I think that this is really a step forward. So thank you all for your hard work to get us here.
Thank you, Director Esparza-Brown. I'm going to ask the veteran of this, Dr. Konstam, if you want to make some comments, since you were here when it all began.
So the only thing I wanted to comment on was just the tenor of the talks over the long trajectory, and we spent a lot of time at the beginning really learning about and engaging in interest-based bargaining, which is a way of having dialogue that is really about what are your concerns and interests that you are bringing to this? What are your stories? What are your experiences? Which is a little bit different than starting with an inherently oppositional framework, which is, this is what I'm trying to get. Well, this is what I'm trying to get over here, and then meet in the middle, which is, I think, a layperson's characterization of traditional bargaining. So we spent a lot of time in that, and I think in the middle of the process, we got away from it, and it looked and felt more like traditional bargaining. But I really feel like at the end, it came back to the original ideals of interest-based bargaining and having a much more open dialogue, and that in the end, it was pretty clear that we had much more in common than we had differences in terms of what we were all looking for our students from our different roles. And I would say that was really a three-legged stool of the union and the teachers that they represent, and our superintendent and his administrative team, and the values that the board brought forward into the process. And in the end, they were really very common. We had some different ideas about how we wanted to address some of these problems, but we all really recognized the points where this system is in real need of reform. And the one area I want to highlight in particular is that we have a roadmap for really building a much stronger, more responsive system of supports for all of our students, academic and socio-emotional. Some of the specific issues around our special education students come to bear in this, but it really is something that is needed for all of our students at every level. And I know this is some work that Dr. Curtis has been charged with, and others with really building out in our system. And the absence of that is what has allowed kids to fall through the cracks in our system, in my opinion. So I just wanted to speak to that, and also to say that with those systems of support for our students, we also spent a lot of time talking about systems of support for our educators and what does meaningful professional development really look like, professional development that is going to bear good results for our kids and their achievement. And those discussions were fruitful, but I think also the ideas that really the superintendent put forth about how he intends to use that precious time with teachers in those professional development days and school meetings is really where we are going to move things forward. So,
if I can make...
No,
Sorry.
Go ahead, Julie.
No, I just wanted to make one more comment, Amy, since Dr. Konstam, since you reminded me about the original. I was on an original team that did use that interest-based bargaining over a year ago, and we talked about a rapid response team, so to provide support for teachers and schools when students were having crises and needed support outside of just the school staff. And so we're working towards funding that. I think we're realizing now, the fruits of that early bargaining too, which is critically important to have services for students that need kind of above and beyond.
Yeah. Thank you.
Dr. Anthony, do you have some comments?
I don't have any more comments, but there is a very important issue, and I'm hoping Superintendent Guerrero or Ms. Rogers, you could speak to it. The language on page, let's see, 149, limiting turnover, which for some of our schools has become a huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
So the language on page 149 talks specifically about a joint commitment to work together to identify the schools that have high turnover, to understand what the root cause of that turnover is, and to really explore and identify solutions to reduce that turnover and to keep our educators in those schools supporting students there. So I think this really just represents, again, what Director Constam talked about a system that we really need to build a lot of supports into, and that includes supports for our educators in looking at how we retain, not just attract the best educators, but retain the best educators in those schools.
So it's not. Director Esparza Brown, could you put your phone on mute unless you're speaking?
Sorry.
Thank you. Director Moore?
I joined the bargaining team about almost 8 months ago now. And I have to say, at the beginning, it was a bit of a slog. I think I came in when we were in the middle of the traditional bargaining mode, which is something less than scintillating, and frankly didn't feel all that productive. And then it changed, and it changed when we got some new people, and in particular when we got Superintendent Guerrero.
What were you guys talking about all that time?
You don't want to know.
Sharing stories.
So I think this is, I'm thrilled with this contract. Obviously I wasn't involved in previous ones. I was on the sidelines during previous ones, and my perception in the past was that getting to an agreement in a contract was painful in this district. And it was always kind of 11th hour, somebody pulls a rabbit out of a hat, and it's a really ugly rabbit. And nobody's happy, but at least we were done. And that's pretty much the best anybody could say about it. And this was different. I think the last, in a way, there was the pre-Guerrero and the post-Guerrero, and the portion of the negotiations that happened since October were completely different in tone on both sides, and we started talking about, okay, let me say, I suspect during the initial, IBB, the interest-based bargaining, my impression is that a lot of discussions were happening about really critical issues, and some really good work was done. And then we had that lull, and then we started talking about the important stuff again. And we were talking about issues that I have heard about from teachers for years, and in way more detail than I had ever experienced before. We were talking about things that I'd heard for years from administrators in this building, in way more detail than I had ever experienced. But we weren't talking about things in the abstract. I mean, people were telling stories about real life actual children and how we can serve them better. And it was to the extent a negotiation can be thrilling, it was. At the end of it, those last few days were extraordinarily long. But at the end of it, everybody was smiling. I'm pretty sure that didn't happen in the past. And I think this is a groundbreaking contract in many ways. It's groundbreaking for the state of Oregon because we are talking about why class size matters and what we can do about it. As a parent of a kid in this district, I know how important class size has been, and we have had problems, and we have made a commitment to pay attention to class sizes and do what we can to make sure that class sizes are manageable for teachers and for students. It's also groundbreaking for this district because I sincerely hope this is the beginning of a completely new era. I hope the days of district and teachers being on opposite sides, yelling at each other and forgetting that we're actually both in it for the same purpose, to serve kids. Those days are over, I hope. And it's now up to all of us to live up to the promise of this contract. And I'm hopeful that we're all going to do it. And the last thing I'll say is, this contract is just one piece. This is a huge district. This is just one union. We have many, many others. And this is just one lever. We have work to do in central office administration. A lot of it has already started. A lot more has to happen. We are already seeing the impact of, I think, huge changes that have happened in the HR department, thanks to new people. I think that's going to make an enormous difference. We've got new people in curriculum and instruction, and things are happening. It may take a while for a lot of those changes to become visible to parents and students out there, but they're happening. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. This is the very first time in the entire time I have been paying attention to PPS that I am actually optimistic. We can do this. We're going to do better for kids. So thank you to everybody who was involved.
It's all been said. I just want to say thank you to both teams. Speaking to both mics, can I speak out of both sides of my mouth at the same time? No, I just want to say thank you, and I agree this is a big step going forward, not only for what's in the contract, but the spirit in which where we ended up. So that's good.
Director Rosen?
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you specifically to Directors Constam, Moore, and Brim Edwards. I mean, you guys put in countless hours. It's mind-boggling how much, how hard you worked on this, and I really appreciate it. I want to thank the union for all your hard work. I know you spent equal amount of countless hours, and you went through some rough patches, but you hung in there. And then Superintendent Guerrero and Laird and Kylie and Antonio. I know you were everyone put in an incredible number of hours. And I want to thank all the board members for their good questions. That was really, I think we had a good discussion tonight. And then finally, I want to thank the public and the parents and the press, who in 72 hours came up with about a dozen good questions. And you know, we didn't change the contract, but we clarified a lot of important points that I hope will satisfy all the parties. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you. Student Representative Tran, do you want to say anything?
I would just like to thank everyone involved. I think this contract is monumental for our district, and just shows a token of appreciation from students that the district and the PAT have the best interests of teachers at heart, and that if we can support our teachers better, then we can support our students better, and really shows how this district is moving forward to bring students first.
I had one note that I forgot to say, which is that I think a lot of the momentum that we were able to grab onto toward the end of this process was due to our superintendent really showing up as a teacher, as a lifelong educator. And I think that was very clear to all of our teacher friends and union leadership. And it's what helped catalyze ideas around innovative solutions to what had been pretty intractable problems or conflicts. But I think that was really the guiding light that landed this contract and that led that process.
Thank you, Director Constam. So unless anybody else has some other comments, I'm just going to close out. So this was my third time participating on a bargaining team. And to Regis' point, I was part of those times when the ugly rabbit got pulled out. But it was the only one in the hat. So we did what we had to do. And so I would say, you know, I wasn't there at the beginning, but certainly there when it was a little, you know, it wasn't clear that we were going to get to a good moment and something that would work for both our teachers and our students. And I think we, you know, worked through it as we should, and I think that's a great. It'll be a great model for going forward, that we're not always going to agree, but that we have the capacity to listen to each other, try and understand each other's perspectives, and get to a better place. So I'm going to support this agreement tonight because it has wins for students and teachers, and it will allow us to move forward in partnership with our teachers on some very important issues that we need to tackle. So, you know, wins for students and parents, more guaranteed instructional time for students, more time for teachers to plan and prepare their work, more time for teachers to participate in professional development. That's, at the end of the day, it may be teacher focused, but the beneficiary are our students. There'll be a focus on class size and workload so that students and teachers have opportunities for more personalized instructions. And, you know, I think I'm not sure class size matters to every student, but for some students, it really matters to get that personalized attention. And I think it is going to make a difference for students who, in the past, because of workloads or class size, haven't been able to receive that. So as a parent, those are all aspects of the contract that I find to be very student-centered and supportive also of helping our teachers do their job well, which we all should care about. Am I happy with everything in the contract and did the district prevail in every instance? No, but that's what negotiations and mediation is about. It's about finding common ground. I want to sort of briefly say that, you know, we've had many questions about our public records policy section of the agreement. As the chair of the committee, considering revised complaint policy and the public records policy, they're issues that we take seriously, and we'll move ahead with the work on those. But I should note that, as we would have done regardless of what was in the contract, we will consult with and want to hear the perspective of all our employee groups, because they have something to add. They can provide key insights, and we're always going to want to hear from staff and teachers on any policy that we're creating, because we're a whole school community, and they have things to add to the discussion that are valuable. So from my perspective, this contract lays a foundation for the work ahead between our teachers and our district, And I think it really gives us a roadmap to do some great things. So I'm delighted at this time to say that the board is now going to vote on Resolution 5569. As amended. Thank you, Liz. Julie, if you want to take your phone off mute, we're going to get ready to vote. And I'm going to, do people want to have a roll call vote? Or
You
do
hear
they
me?
want to? Yeah, we can hear you. Do you want a roll call vote? Or? Okay.
I'm sorry?
We're doing a roll call vote.
Okay.
Ms. Hewson, please call the roll.
Director Rosen.
Yes.
Director Bailey.
Yes.
Director Moore.
Yes.
Director Anthony.
Yes.
Director Constam.
Yes.
Director Esparza Brown.
Yes.
Chair Brim Edwards.
Yes.
And Student Representative Tran.
Yes.
I'm delighted to say that the resolution passes 7-0 with Student Representative Tran voting yes. And I think it's appropriate to end this evening with by asking if you're interested. Our partner in the process, Suzanne Cohen, the president of PAT.
Thank you very much. This is really an exciting day, and thank you all for your comments. It really has almost all been said, and I really appreciate it. Of course, I want to thank all the board directors, because I know that you all volunteer, but especially those that served on the bargaining team, especially for so long. And of course, thank our bargaining team and really all the teachers who were very, very patient during a very difficult time with a lot of uncertainty around what direction this district was going to take. Our own bargaining team lost 2 members to other districts as we started looking at comparables. And I'm really, really excited to be at the place that we are now. For a long time, we had, you've heard us say, a better day before a longer year. And as you hear about the 2 days and only before cutting staffing, that might sound selfish, but what we are at the heart of, that staff, is those reasonable class sizes and caseloads. It's our media specialists, it's art, it's counselors. So it's everything we know that goes into a really great school day. And we wanted to have as much of those really great school days as possible. But we never wanted to compromise on what a better day meant. This class size language is everything in that direction that we were hoping for. And no, these numbers are not the best numbers ever, but they are a step. And I really, a lot of talk is about Superintendent Guerrero and the catalyst for change. And I'm sorry about OPB, but we needed you there, and we wanted you there, and it did change when you were there. And your experience as an educator, the tone really did change, because where we talked, and yes, we made you listen, and we talked and talked, when we had a partner who could hear it and understood it and was ready to do stuff about it, especially around class size, where we had been met for over and over again, that was just something we were not going to discuss. We weren't going to talk about it. And then we had someone who said, if this is important to you, then let's talk about it. And it is important to us, and as has been stated, it's really important to our students and to our families. We wear our shirts, we say that we're fighting for the schools Portland students deserve, and this is the next step in that direction, but also this is a step in fighting for the schools that Oregon students deserve. We now have an opportunity to be even prouder to be a part of PPS, because we are the first school district in Oregon to really talk about class size, which we know matters. And now as the state is looking at a bill around this very issue, I would just encourage everyone to know that the big turning point when we talked about mediation or strike or implementing, it was the willingness to have a conversation about what we care about. And so I really thank you and applaud you for not being afraid to talk about that very important issue. Our bargaining chair, Steve Lancaster, regrets that he had to leave, but I will not be nearly as well-spoken as he is with his comments. But he wanted, as we close the chapter of negotiations, what we're really just embarking on is the next step. I've testified, we want to see it in writing, and now we have that. And the next goal is to make sure that that contract's being followed, and has been spoken. We have struggled with that effort. As many PAT members ask me, like, how do you know? How do you know that you can trust? And we have nothing to gain and no benefit if we don't trust and believe at this point. We have commitments, and it is up to us to make sure we're following them and doing the right stuff. But in the spirit of negotiations and everything that we've done together, I really, really am optimistic, and I'm excited about the collaboration. I'm excited about the work ahead of us. This is a very, very new contract with a lot of new issues, and so of course our reps and our administrators will all need to make sure that we understand how this works and the true intent behind it, and that's why I really appreciate you being at the bargaining table, because you understand the intent behind it. I know we all need a great little rest right now, and I'm excited about this opportunity and the cause for celebration. And then I should say that I'm really, really excited about the next steps that this contract gets and moving forward together to just keep working on making sure that Portland Public Schools really is the schools that all our students deserve. So thank you to everybody, and thank you to our wonderful, wonderful students who are really always in our hearts and minds as we have any of these conversations. So thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you. So with that, unless there's anything else, the meeting is adjourned.